Gotta make sure my hair's right, you know? Touched up. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Malignant Young Park Dotting inside my chest, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. Hungarian. I got it. Okay. All right, so I do have the round 5 game between Wesley and Richárd Rapport. So, as of course, for all my people that are coming from the Philippines, I will say my hi to you. Kamusta? Aking makaibigan. Masaya akong makita kang muli. Mabuting pagbati. Almasal tayo. Magandang umaga, magandang hapon, magandang araw. Magandang gabi. My guy that's in Texas. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. And don't worry, Ronaldo, it is not a Slav. Anyway, if anybody who is coming from Hungary, I will say hello. It is Kusinim. Thank you very much for coming by and taking a look at my stuff. You guys are ready to go. Let's take a look and see what we got rolling. We got E4, E5, knight to F3. We got knight to C6, bishop to C4. We have bishop to C5, D3, D6, castles, H6, and then we have C3. So it's a little bit different, but we still have a Giuoco piano, Giuoco Pianissimo. Very quiet game, ultimately. We have bishop back to B6. We see rook to E1, knight G to E7. And as crazy as it sounds, you probably won't believe me. This is the novelty of the game. Most likely it's due to the H3 and the knight G to E7. That is not normally played. Usually you see a knight to F6. But, I mean, the intent is pretty clear. Black is wanting to push the F pawn at some point. That's their little pawn break that they want to get in. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious. At some point, you know that move is going to be coming. So we have B4 by white. We got A6. Of course, you have to give the bishop some room to breathe. We see bishop back to B3. We have castles. Knight B to D2. We see king over to H8. Making sure because, you are going to be trying to push the F pawn. You can't do that if the pawn is pinned. So we have knight to C4. Bishop goes all the way back to A7. We got A4. And then now we have F5. Of course, as you guys can see, if this bishop was, here, this knight is here, this king is still in a square, F5 would be like just completely deadly. You're going to be having a discovery. Most likely you're going to go to B6 and you're going to be winning this rook for absolutely free or for at least just an exchange. And so we do see rook to A2. And the crazy thing is if knight G to E7 wasn't the novelty, I can guarantee you that this would have been. Because rook to A2, man, that's crazy, dude. I mean, that's an interesting move, dude. Like, I literally was completely surprised when I saw that move. I was like, rook to A2. Man, craziness. We have B5. Knight comes down to E3. We got F4. But that just helps the knight go to where it wants to go. It wants to go to D5. Bishop comes to G4. We see H3. Bishop comes back to H5. We see pawn takes B5. Pawn takes B5. And then we have D4. Things are actually looking pretty good for white. We see pawn takes D4, knight takes F4, and then we have actually reached a position that if you do want to pause the video and see what black does, there's a lot going on in the position. Go ahead and pause it and see if you can guess the move that black plays in the game. Okay, cool. So it might kind of seem like, you got this knight that comes back here. So this bishop is kind of in a certain type of an issue. Like, okay, bishop takes F3. Bishop comes back to F7. Just, encourages a trade of the pieces, or even back to, to E8. Maybe probably putting it on D7 at some point. But black does not do any of that. He says, dude, you know what? Give me the rook. So rook takes F4. So it wasn't on my radar like whatsoever. So if you didn't guess rook takes F4, don't feel bad. I would have made a bishop move most likely. I probably would have just retreated my bishop back to E8 or something like that. But this is actually it's crazy because this was actually a top suggested move by the engine. The engine literally says, hey, give up the exchange because it's just somehow supposed to be good. So the bishop takes on F4. We see queen over to F8. And then the bishop comes back to H2. For some reason, the computer is saying that, bishop back to G3 or bishop back to C1 is actually best. You're still going to get your structure damaged possibly. So, I don't really know how it matters. But bishop comes back to H2. We see pawn takes C3. We see G4. you know, trying to make sure that we don't have any structural damage going on. Bishop comes back to f7, and this is forcing the trade. Bishop takes f7, queen takes f7, and then we do have rook over to c2, but then we have queen to c4. And I mean, yeah, you've given up the exchange as black, but I mean, the position is actually really nice for black. You know, you have an extra pawn. This pawn is suspect. This rook is going to be swinging over. You know, you have a little bit of pressure from this bishop on this diagonal. So, I mean, you definitely have some positives in the position for, you know, giving up the exchange. So you have queen over to c1. And, you know, this is just adding a lot of pressure to this pawn over here. We see knight to d4. And then this is something else that's very interesting. The computer actually says, give the exchange back. So it actually wants you to take on c3. And then after the knight takes on e2, you got rook takes e2, queen takes e2. And, I mean, pretty much everything is equal. Black definitely has like a slight advantage in the position. And we see queen to e1. And like the most interesting thing about the situation is it is actually suggested that you actually go queen to c2. Like you allow this capture with check, bishop takes f2 with check, and just step up with the king to g2. And in this position, you are forced to trade queens. Queen takes c2, rook takes c2. And I mean, you definitely have some attacks rolling. I mean, the rook is on this pawn. The bishop has to move. And I mean, you're just doing, you know, pretty okay. So this is like what the computer is saying is great. So, but like I said, we do see queen to e1. We have queen over to b2. Queen comes to d2. We see queen taking b4. So, you know, black has managed to snag a pawn. Rook takes c7. Queen takes e4. And then we do have king to g2. And the unfortunate thing about the situation right now is this actually places you in a pin. And there's actually a way that black can exploit the pin. But Rapport actually misses his opportunity and he plays knight to d5. If we back up, I think it probably is like a move that like a lot of people can see. And the move is actually, did I put it? Oh yeah, I put it. Okay. The move is actually rook to f8. And I mean, there are not a lot of great options for you as white in this position. Probably you're going to want to go ahead and take the bishop on a7 while you're going to be losing some material. Queen takes f3. You have king down to g1, knight to c6, and this is just getting a beautiful tempo on the rook. Rook coming down to a1, and then queen taking h3. And you guys can see you're just up 2 entire pawns. And I mean, everything else is fairly equal. So you definitely have some things to worry about with these pawns. Of course, you know, the queen is most likely going to go ahead and take. You know, you can just keep playing on. But, you know, this pass pawn over here can probably be pretty dangerous. So, but like I said, we did have king to g2. Knight came down to d5. And this allowed, like, white to kind of get out of the trouble that he was in. Rook comes to f7. We see b4. Bishop takes d6. We see rook to d8. And then we see a really, really nice move, you know, Zwischenzug move, which is queen to b2. And it is threatening checkmate on g7. So as I always say, why not threaten checkmate, right? And so this is also attacking this bishop. And so, you know, something has to give. So the bishop actually has to give itself up. So the bishop comes to d4. We see queen taking d4, queen taking d4, knight taking d4. We got rook taking d6. So everything's pretty equal. I mean, you do kind of have to worry about this pawn just a little bit. So you got to be careful how you're playing. King comes to f3. We see rook to b6. Knight to b3. We see rook over to c6. And this can be pretty deadly if you don't recognize that there's a check forking your pieces here. So we actually see knight to d4. Rook comes to c4. We see king to e4. So as you guys can see, I mean, compared to black, white is pretty activated. I mean, they got their king in the center of the board. You know, everything is still fairly equal, but you know, there's a little bit there. So the knight comes back to f6 with check. We see king to e5. Rook comes down to c3. We see rook to b7. And like I said, I mean, there's definitely a problem with this pawn. So we, you know, put a rook behind it, you know. So the rook takes on h3. We see king to f5. We're trying to be sneaky. We're trying to get up into this square over here and put black in a certain situation where the king will be here. You might can swing the knight like this, and you can pin this, you know, this rook down to the king. So, you know, Rapport says, I don't want any of that, man. So he goes king to h7. We see rook takes b4. Rook to d3. We see f3. And then we see knight to d5. And there's something actually very funny that's coming up in the position. After we see knight to d5, we see rook to a4, getting away from the knight's attack. We see knight to b6. We see rook to b4. We see knight to d7. We see rook back to a4. We see knight to b6. And this is where the funniness comes in. This is actually not what was played in the game, but somehow the board registered this, and it's rook to c4. Obviously, rook to c4 just completely just drops your knight or drops your rook, and this is completely lost for white. So that is not what happened. They actually just continued to just repeat position like this, and then they ended up getting into a draw this way. So, you know, it is in this area that they, you know, like I said, that they got into a draw. But I actually almost missed rook to c4. And then the computer was like going crazy. It was like, yeah, man, just take the rook. And I'm like, what? Like, it couldn't have went like this, dude. So, like I said, it couldn't have went like that, man. But for all of my people in the Philippines, I'll go ahead and do these good mornings real quick for you. So, maayong buntag, mayad na agahan, naibag na bigat, masantos ya kabason, marhe na aga, buenos dias, maayong aga, mapia na uma, kapian kapuno dios, mayap abak, mayad na aga, mapia agay, mapia kapapita, my big abukla, marjana buntag, marya may nat, malpe na aga, kasan yangan si ilubi. Salam, assalamu alaikum, merci to you guys out there. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. And kusanem for anybody who is coming from Hungary. And I will see you guys next time.